My best friend became convinced she was in love with her mother's significantly older boyfriend and began secretly seeing him. When she later became pregnant by him, we had no option but to reveal his disturbing secret and expose him completely. During 11th grade, my best friend started showing up to school wearing clothes from Urban Outfitters and Brandy Melville. These were brands that neither she, I, nor anyone else in our friend group could afford, so naturally we questioned her about it. She brushed it off by saying her mom had a new boyfriend who was trying to impress her. I laughed because I understood the situation all too well. Take advantage while you can, I joked. Another friend laughed too. After that, we dropped the subject. About a week later, she came to school with an unusually bright smile. Jane was never a negative person, but she was always quiet and reserved. I assumed she might have started dating someone. Even her skin looked clearer, but I didn't want to embarrass her in front of everyone. After school, I casually asked if she was seeing someone. Her face instantly turned red. She told me not to ask her that again. Her tone was sharp and cold, which felt completely out of character. Over the next few days, I started paying closer attention. One afternoon, I noticed she was wearing a Pandora charm bracelet, partially hidden under her sleeve. Her family's income was similar to mine, so it didn't add up. Since some of our friends had started shoplifting, I assumed she might be doing the same. I joked about it, calling her a kleptomaniac. Her face flushed again, but this time she was angry. She told me to stop making comments like that and walked away. Later that day, I realized I had lost a follower on Instagram. Something told me to check if it was Jane, and it was. Jane and I had always been extremely close. We shared clothes, personal items, and even private moments without any discomfort. She was like a sister to me, so unfollowing me felt alarming. It was clear she wasn't going to tell me the truth. Instead of waiting, I went to her house with cheap store-bought cookies wrapped in foil, pretending I had baked them myself. A man I had never seen before answered the door wearing only boxers. He didn't seem embarrassed at all. Behind him stood Jane in a revealing bathrobe with smeared makeup. My stomach dropped. She immediately ran to the bathroom. I forced enthusiasm into my voice, dropped off the cookies, and left as quickly as I could. It was clear my best friend was being groomed. I didn't know how to handle a situation like this. Going to the police without her admitting anything wouldn't help. So I called our friend Emily. She was the only person I trusted to take this seriously, instead of treating it like gossip. She always seemed to know what to do. She told me we needed to help Jane understand that what was happening was wrong and dangerous. Emily happened to be scheduled to present a school project later that month about online safety. She told me to trust her and focus on rebuilding Jane's trust. The next day at school, Jane was visibly nervous, clearly waiting for me to say something. When I didn't, she relaxed and became friendly again. It felt normal, like before. I also noticed she stopped hiding her expensive jewelry and began wearing a locket every day with a photo inside. Emily's presentation finally arrived. She started with topics like cyberbullying and password sharing, so I didn't immediately see where it was heading. Then she introduced a section on online grooming. One slide focused on older individuals targeting younger people, sending them money, and pretending to care in order to exploit them. The class reacted with shock, and even the teacher commented on how unacceptable and dangerous this behavior was. I watched Jane closely as her discomfort grew. She bounced her leg rapidly and bit her nails until there was nothing left. When she suddenly asked to leave the room and ran out crying, I knew the message had reached her. At lunch, I received a flood of messages from Jane asking me to meet her in the bathroom. I found her curled up in a stall, holding her stomach and struggling to breathe. I stroked her hair until she finally said it. She told me she was pregnant. I pulled back slightly, shocked. She nodded, unable to even say the word stepfather. I hugged her tightly and reminded her she wasn't alone. Gradually, she calmed down. We stayed there for a long time until her breathing steadied. I helped her clean her face with paper towels. The bell rang for the next class, but we didn't move. I asked how far along she was. She thought around 8 weeks and said she had taken 3 tests, all positive. When I asked if he knew, she nodded and began crying again. She said he blamed her, claiming she had trapped him. I told her we needed to inform someone, like a counselor. She agreed, admitting she couldn't continue like this. She showed me a dark bruise around her wrist and said he had grabbed her when she said she wanted to keep the baby. I stayed calm and suggested we go see Miss Reyes, the school counselor. Jane hesitated briefly, then agreed. We walked to the counselor's office together. Miss Reyes took one look at Jane's tear-streaked face and immediately brought us inside, closing the door behind us. She looked at us with a calm, understanding expression. You're doing the right thing, I whispered to Jane. I promise. Miss Reyes cleared her throat. She asked Jane whether she was in immediate danger and if law enforcement needed to be contacted. Jane stiffened beside me. She said no firmly and begged us not to call the police, explaining that he would know she had spoken. Miss Reyes and I exchanged a look. I could tell she was legally required to report certain details, but Jane's fear was obvious. I quickly explained that the shelter Emily had found did not require police involvement right away and could help Jane plan her next steps safely. Miss Reyes nodded and offered to drive us there after school. Until then, she said Jane could stay in her office. Jane squeezed my hand so hard her knuckles turned white and asked me not to leave her alone. I promised I would stay. Miss Reyes approved and said she would write excused absences for both of us before stepping out to give us privacy. Once we were alone, Jane broke down again. She said he would be furious and that I didn't understand how he behaved when he was angry. The bruise around her eye had faded to a yellow-green shade, barely hidden under makeup that now streaked down her face. I couldn't help wondering what other injuries were concealed beneath her clothes. I gently asked what had happened with the pregnancy. Jane stared at the floor, her shoulders slumped. She said she told him she was pregnant, and he accused her of trying to trap him. Her voice sounded empty. She explained that he drove her to a clinic 2 towns away, paid in cash, used fake names, and threatened to tell her mother lies if she ever spoke to anyone. I felt furious, but kept my expression calm. I asked if she had wanted to keep the baby. Jane shrugged, saying she never got to make a decision. She then explained the black eye she had thrown up in his car afterward, and he accused her of doing it on purpose. We sat quietly for a while, her head resting on my shoulder as her breathing slowly steadied. I texted Emily to let her know we were with the counselor and planned to go to the shelter. She replied immediately, saying she was coming and told us not to leave without her. Around lunchtime, Miss Reyes brought sandwiches from the cafeteria. Jane barely touched hers, picking at the crust before pushing it aside. I remembered how she used to eat everything and joke about never getting full. Now she looked noticeably thinner than she had at the start of the school year. Jane suddenly asked what would happen if her mom reported her missing. I reassured her that the shelter would help handle that, even though I wasn't completely sure how the process worked. Jane nodded, but I could tell her thoughts were racing. Her phone buzzed several times, and she kept checking it nervously. After the 3rd alert made her flinch, I asked if it was him. Jane nodded and silenced the phone, her hands shaking. She said he thought she was still at school and might come looking for her if she didn't respond. My stomach dropped. I suggested we leave immediately instead of waiting until after school. I texted Emily, who said she would meet us at the counselor's car in 5 minutes. When I explained the situation, Miss Reyes agreed to take us right away. As we walked through the mostly empty halls toward the staff parking lot, Jane suddenly stopped and reached for her neck. She whispered that she had forgotten her locket in her locker and insisted she needed to get it. I urged her to leave, but she pleaded, saying it would only take a moment. Against my instincts, I agreed. We stopped at her locker, and she quickly retrieved the gold locket. Instead of putting it on, she dropped it into an empty soda can from the trash nearby. She said she didn't want it anymore, but she didn't want him to have it either. We met Emily and Miss Reyes at the car. The drive to the shelter took about 20 minutes. Jane grew increasingly anxious, picking at her cuticles until one began to bleed. I gave her a tissue, which she wrapped around her finger without looking. Outside the window, familiar neighborhoods gave way to apartment buildings and small businesses. Miss Reyes drove carefully, checking the rearview mirror often to be sure we weren't being followed. The shelter was a plain building with security cameras and a buzzer at the entrance. Nothing outside identified it as a shelter. It looked like a typical office building. Miss Reyes spoke into the intercom, and we were led inside. A woman named Tara greeted us. She was calm, kind, and direct, which immediately put me at ease. Tara took Jane to a private room to talk. Emily, Miss Reyes, and I waited in a small lounge with clean but worn furniture. I asked if Jane would be safe there. Miss Reyes assured me the shelter had strong security measures. Emily pulled out her notebook and explained she had brought documentation, including dates, social media posts, and other evidence related to Kevin. Miss Reyes said that information would be very helpful. I looked around the room at posters about domestic violence and safety planning. Pamphlets in different languages were stacked on a table, and a small play area with used but clean toys sat in one corner. A bulletin board displayed anonymous notes from women who had rebuilt their lives after leaving abuse. I wondered if Jane might someday add her own message there. After about an hour, Tara returned without Jane and explained that she was settling into a room and had agreed to stay at the shelter. I asked if we could see her, but Tara said visits weren't allowed for the first 72 hours due to safety protocols. She explained Jane could use the shelter phone to call at scheduled times, and that personal devices were not allowed initially because tracking software was often installed. We left our contact information and prepared to go. Before leaving, Tara allowed a brief goodbye. Jane sat on a twin bed in a small, clean room, looking scared but relieved. The room was simple, with minimal furniture and a partially covered window. I hugged her and told her I was proud of her. She thanked me for not giving up on her. The drive back to school was quiet. Miss Reyes dropped Emily and me off with notes excusing our absences. Emily asked what would happen next. I said we would wait. Jane was finally safe, but nothing felt finished. That evening, Jane called from the shelter phone. She admitted she was scared, but said the staff were kind and that there was another girl her age staying there. She said her mother had called and believed she was staying with me for a few days. Kevin, she said, had called repeatedly. The shelter staff advised her not to answer and confirmed that tracking apps had been installed on her phone. After the call, I tried to do homework but couldn't focus. My thoughts kept returning to Jane. I checked my phone constantly, even though I knew she wouldn't call again that night. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang again. It was Jane's mother. She asked if Jane was really staying with me. I said yes, explaining we were working on a project. Then she said Kevin had driven by my house and noticed the lights were mostly off. My chest tightened. I quickly said we were in the basement for better internet. She didn't sound convinced, but said she would call again the next day. After hanging up, I immediately contacted the shelter and asked them to warn Jane. The staff member promised to pass the message along. I locked all the doors and windows and closed the curtains. The thought of Kevin watching my house made my skin crawl. I barely slept that night, startled by every sound, imagining his black car parked across the street, his eyes watching my house. The following day at school, rumors were already spreading about Jane's absence and my disappearance with her the day before. I heard whispers as I walked through the halls. People were speculating about pregnancy, running away, and a secret boyfriend. I ignored the talk and met Emily at lunch. I told her quietly that Kevin had driven past my house the night before looking for Jane. Emily's eyes widened, and she said it was disturbing. I agreed and said he definitely suspected something. I also explained that Jane's mother seemed convinced something was wrong. We spent lunch discussing possible next steps. Emily had researched similar situations and discovered that without Jane making a formal police statement, there was very little legal action that could be taken against Kevin. She explained that the shelter could help Jane explore restraining order options, but only if Jane was willing to come forward. After school, Jane called me again. She sounded more stable than she had the previous day. She told me the counselor at the shelter was helping her understand how Kevin had manipulated her from the beginning. She then said she still wasn't ready to go to the police and needed time to think. I understood her hesitation, but I worried about how long she could remain hidden. I told Jane that her mother had called me and that Kevin was actively searching for her. Jane said she already knew. She explained that Kevin had called the shelter's main number several times. The staff refused to confirm whether she was there, but she believed it was only a matter of time before he figured it out. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining Kevin sitting in his car, watching my house. I checked every lock before bed and startled at every sound. Even though my room was on the second floor, I kept the curtains tightly closed. I tried to distract myself with homework and Netflix, but my thoughts kept spiraling. The next morning, I received a text from an unknown number. It said, "I know what you did. Stay out of things that don't concern you." My hands shook as I read it. The message was vague, but I knew exactly who had sent it. I showed it to Emily as soon as I arrived at school. She agreed it had to be Kevin and added it to her documentation. I hesitated when she suggested telling someone right away, saying I didn't want to make things worse for Jane. By lunchtime, the situation escalated. Jane's mother arrived at school demanding to speak with me. When I was called to the office, I found her looking exhausted and angry, still wearing wrinkled nurse's scrubs. She demanded to know where her daughter was. When I tried to respond, she accused me of lying. She said Kevin had told her everything, claiming I had filled Jane's head with lies and tried to turn her against them. I was stunned. She said Jane had told Kevin that I was jealous of their relationship and had been making up stories about him. That's when I realized Kevin must have had access to Jane's accounts. If he had installed tracking software, he could have installed other things too. I carefully told Mrs. Walker that none of that was true and that Kevin was not who she believed he was. Mrs. Walker defended him, saying he had been nothing but supportive and was the only father figure Jane had known. I asked if she had spoken to Jane directly, not through Kevin. She hesitated and admitted she had only received texts from Jane's number. I suggested she try speaking to Jane herself. She left looking unsettled, which felt like a small step forward. I immediately called the shelter to warn them about Kevin's increased behavior and his possible access to Jane's accounts. That afternoon, Emily and I went to the local police station to ask, hypothetically, what could be done in a case like Jane's. The station was small and sterile, and the officer at the desk became attentive once we mentioned a minor. Detective Morales listened closely as we explained the situation without naming anyone. She said that without the victim coming forward, their options were limited. However, she explained that if there was evidence of a crime, they could investigate. Emily mentioned the social media activity and the threatening text. Detective Morales gave us her card and told us to contact her if Jane decided to report or if we felt unsafe. A week passed. Jane called every day from the shelter, sounding stronger each time. She was working with counselors and legal advocates to prepare for what came next. Her mother had finally spoken to her directly and was beginning to understand the truth, though Jane hadn't shared everything yet. I continued going to school and trying to focus, but my thoughts were always on Jane. Then one morning, I arrived at school and saw Kevin waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his black car. My stomach dropped. I kept walking, hoping he wouldn't notice me. There were other students around, and I thought I would be safer in the crowd. He called out my name in a friendly tone, identifying me as Jane's friend. I stopped, my heart racing. Up close, I could see why Jane might have been drawn to him. He was polished and confident, wearing expensive clothes and a luxury watch, completely out of place at a school. He spoke casually, saying Jane had been struggling and that he and her mother were worried. I told him I hadn't seen her. He replied that her mother had said she was staying with me. His smile stayed in place, but his eyes hardened. He asked if I would really lie to a concerned parent. I said I needed to get to class and tried to walk past him, but he stepped in front of me. He said I might think I was helping Jane, but I wasn't. He claimed Jane had issues and had made accusations before. My skin crawled. He stepped aside and told me to ask Jane to call him, saying he forgave her and that they could fix things. I rushed inside and texted Emily immediately. She met me by my locker and said that what he had done was intimidation. We agreed to contact Detective Morales. During lunch, we called her and reported the encounter. She took it seriously but explained that without Jane filing a report, there were limits She did say she could address harassment if Kevin approached me again at school. After school, I called Jane and told her what had happened. She said he sounded desperate and explained that the shelter staff considered that a sign he was losing control. I also told her that her mother had come to school and seemed to be questioning Kevin's story. Jane went quiet for a moment. I'm going to tell her everything. The shelter offered to mediate the conversation and believed her mother would trust her more if she heard the truth directly. I asked Jane if she was ready. She admitted she wasn't, but said she couldn't keep hiding forever. 2 days later, Jane called me with an update. Her mother had come to the shelter, and they talked for hours. Jane's voice broke as she told me her mom believed her and had kicked Kevin out of the house. Relief hit me immediately. Jane added that her mother was filing for a restraining order and that she had decided to make an initial statement to the police. It wasn't a full report yet, but enough to open a case. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I told her how proud I was. Jane said she planned to return to school the following week. Her mother was looking into transferring her to Westlake for a fresh start, though it might take time. The next few days passed quickly as Emily and I prepared. We cleaned out Jane's locker, gathering her books, gym clothes, and a few photos taped inside. Everything went into a box. The counselor arranged modified assignments so Jane could catch up. I even went shopping with my mom and bought Jane a simple silver bracelet to replace the charm bracelet she had left behind. It wasn't expensive, just a thin band with a small heart, but I hoped it would represent a new beginning. The morning Jane returned, I waited nervously in the parking lot. When her mother's car arrived, I ran over. Jane stepped out looking noticeably different. Her hair was shorter, and she wore a plain t-shirt and jeans instead of the flashy clothes Kevin had bought. The locket and charm bracelet were gone. She hugged me tightly and thanked me for everything. The day was difficult. People stared and whispered. A few classmates asked insensitive questions about where she'd been and whether the rumors were true. Emily and I stayed close, shutting down questions and keeping space around Jane. At lunch, the cafeteria noise overwhelmed her, so we ate outside under a tree away from the crowd. Jane quietly mentioned that Kevin kept texting her mother from new numbers. The police said it didn't violate the temporary restraining order since he wasn't contacting Jane directly or making clear threats. Emily asked if he tried contacting her. Jane said no, but admitted she was afraid to go home. I asked if the locks had been changed. Jane confirmed they had, along with a new security camera, but the fear was still there. I understood it. I'd been on edge myself since Kevin approached me at school. That afternoon, as we walked toward the parking lot, Jane suddenly froze and pointed to a black sedan idling near the exit. I immediately pulled her back inside and suggested going to the office to call her mom and the police. School security checked the area, but the car was already gone. Jane was shaking so badly that the nurse asked her to lie down until her mother arrived. Jane cried, saying he would never stop. I held her hand and told her we wouldn't let him hurt her again. Her mother arrived looking frantic and hugged Jane tightly before thanking me for protecting her. That night, Jane called me close to midnight. She whispered that Kevin had been sitting outside their house in his car. Her mom had called the police, but he left before they arrived. Officers took a report, but explained it still didn't violate the restraining order. Jane said she was exhausted and just wanted it to end. The next day, Jane didn't come to school. Her mother called her in sick, but Jane later admitted they were staying at a hotel because they didn't feel safe at home. Emily and I met at lunch to talk. The shelter offered to help Jane transfer schools quickly. I argued that it felt unfair that Jane had to leave everything behind while Kevin faced no immediate consequences. Emily reminded me that Jane's safety mattered more than fairness. I knew she was right. After school, I drove to the hotel where Jane and her mom were staying. It was a modest place near the highway. Jane looked exhausted but smiled when she saw me. She explained that her mother was working with a lawyer to push for a permanent restraining order and that they were seriously considering the school transfer. I told Jane I'd miss her, but understood. She said the shelter had found a program to help her start over with counseling and support. She might leave as soon as the following week. Her mom could transfer jobs to the new district. I felt both relieved and sad. Jane would be safer, but it felt like we were being separated just as our bond had grown stronger. Jane promised we'd still see each other, just not every day. 2 days later, Jane came back to school to clear out her locker and say goodbye to a few teachers. Emily and I walked with her, staying close. The hallways felt tense, as if people sensed it was her last day. As we left the building, Jane suggested getting coffee together, one last normal moment. We drove to a small cafe nearby and sat in a quiet corner. For a short time, it felt like before, just friends talking and laughing. Jane said she would miss this. Emily reminded her it wasn't forever. Jane admitted she kept thinking about how different everything would be if she hadn't fallen for Kevin's manipulation. I told her firmly that it wasn't her fault. He knew exactly what he was doing. Jane twisted the silver bracelet on her wrist. She shared what her counselor had said, that predators target vulnerable people. Emily pointed out that Jane escaped, and that was what mattered. Jane smiled and thanked us. As we left the cafe, Jane got a text from her mom waiting in the parking lot. We hugged tightly before she left. Jane promised to text me her new number once they were settled. I watched the car drive away, feeling both proud and heartbroken. A week passed without hearing from Jane. I tried not to worry, knowing she was adjusting to a new school. Emily and I returned to our routines, but everything felt quieter. I kept checking my phone. Then 10 days later, I received a text from an unknown number. It was Jane. She said she was safe and had told the full truth. I called her immediately. She sounded more like herself than she had in months. Jane said the new school was different but good. She and her mom were living in a secure apartment, and she was seeing a counselor regularly. When I asked about Kevin, she explained that her mother filed for full custody and banned him from their property. It turned out he had been living with them illegally and had lied about his job, background, and age. The police were now investigating him for other offenses. We talked for nearly an hour. Jane told me about joining an art club and slowly making friends. Her voice sounded lighter, free of the fear that had weighed her down. 2 weeks later, Emily and I drove to Jane's new town to meet her for coffee. She waved excitedly when she saw us. The change in her was clear. She looked healthy, relaxed, and confident. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by simple, comfortable ones. Jane told us Kevin had been arrested. When I asked why, she said she wasn't the first victim. After she made her full statement, police connected him to other cases in different counties. I held her hand and told her how sorry I was. Jane said it meant he couldn't hurt anyone else now. Over coffee, she talked about her classes, therapy, and a support group for survivors. She was healing slowly. When Emily asked about the locket, Jane said she left it behind along with everything Kevin gave her. She touched the silver bracelet and said it was all she needed now. When it was time to leave, we hugged in the parking lot, promising to see each other again soon. Jane stood taller and smiled easily. The fear that once defined her was gone. As Emily and I drove home, I thought about how far Jane had come. Emily said we did good. I agreed. That night, I got one final text from Jane, thanking us for not giving up on her when she had given up on herself. I smiled and typed back, always,